A resounding slap echoed like thunder through Pacific View Restaurant in Malibu, California, silencing every laugh and conversation in the upscale dining room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Sophia Harper Reynolds, 7 months pregnant and still radiant despite her exhaustion, sat frozen, her hand instinctively rising to her burning red cheek as her metal-framed glasses clattered onto the marble floor. She stared across the white linen tablecloth at her husband, Alexander James Kingsley III, his face remaining cold and calculating, even after striking her in front of 50 witnesses. "Pick them up," Alexander commanded, his tone identical to the one he used with subordinates at his tech empire. But tonight, that slap wasn't just an act of violence. It was the spark igniting a battle for justice, where Sophia's brother, a former Navy SEAL, would turn the tables. From the piercing echo of that slap, the atmosphere at Pacific View Restaurant in Malibu seemed to freeze solid. But in truth, it was merely the climax of an evening programmed for failure, just like countless other evenings in the 3-year hell of Sophia Harper Reynolds' marriage. She sat there, under the shimmering crystal chandeliers reflecting the mesmerizing view of the Pacific Ocean, where waves lapped gently against the cliffs below, a mocking reminder of the peace she had never truly possessed. Alexander James Kingsley III, her husband, CEO of a colossal tech empire in Silicon Valley, had chosen this restaurant without bothering to consult her, as if it were just another business decision in his packed schedule. And, as predicted, the appetizer, a vibrant green salad with roasted walnuts, hadn't even cooled before he launched into his familiar lecture about her failures as a wife and soon-to-be mother. At 38, Alexander carried the polished veneer of a textbook success. A tailored Italian suit fitting him like a glove, a glossy silk tie, and a smile honed to seal billion-dollar deals. But beneath that facade was a relentless, calculating machine, always seeking to optimize everything around him, including his wife. He began by criticizing her pregnancy weight gain, his tone flat, like he was reading a financial report. Her added pounds disgusted him, as if her body were ruining the perfect image he'd crafted for their power couple persona. Sophia, once a talented graphic designer with her own San Francisco apartment and a rising career, now felt like an outdated item in his collection. She tried to swallow his words, as she had so many times before, because at 32, she had learned to stay silent to avoid his quiet but deadly rage's outbursts. He always justified with work stress, or "you're embarrassing me in front of colleagues." But tonight something was different. Perhaps it was the pregnancy hormones, or simply the unborn child kicking relentlessly in her belly, a reminder that she was no longer fighting just for herself. Alexander pressed on, shifting to her failure to keep up with social obligations. The Palo Alto cocktail parties she missed due to exhaustion. The business partner invitations she declined out of health concerns. "You're embarrassing me," he whispered, loud enough for only her to hear, but sharp enough to slice through the last scraps of her self-respect. And when she dared suggest taking maternity leave earlier than planned, an idea her doctor had urged to manage her high blood pressure and reduce the risk of preterm labor, his coldest fury erupted. Under the table, his hand clamped her wrist, manicured fingers digging deep into her flesh until she gasped to stifle a cry. At 38, Alexander carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences, backed by a wealthy, established family, a Harvard Ivy League degree, an office overlooking San Francisco Bay, and a pregnant wife trained to stay silent for the sake of peace. But tonight, beneath the flickering candlelight and the gentle jazz humming from hidden speakers, Sophia felt an old spark flare within her. A spark from the girl who once laughed freely with her brother Ben about big dreams before falling into Alexander's web. "The doctor says stress could harm the baby," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute, hoping this time he'd understand. Would see her fear of spiking blood pressure and the risk of early labor if she didn't slow down. But instead of listening, he tightened his grip. "You'll work until that baby is born, and you'll do it with a smile on your face. I won't let my wife look weak in front of my colleagues and clients." That was when Sophia made her mistake, or rather, when she found herself. Instead of nodding and apologizing, as she'd been conditioned through months of subtle psychological control, she looked straight into his eyes, her voice ringing clearer than ever. "I'm not your employee, Alexander. I'm your wife, and I'm carrying your child. I deserve care and respect." Those words hung in the air between them for exactly 3 seconds, 3 seconds long enough for Alexander to weigh his response. But instead, his hand swung up, striking her cheek with force enough to send her glasses flying and plunge the restaurant into a deathly silence. The jazz still played, the waves lapped softly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but every eye turned to them, stunned faces reflected in the glass like a silent testimony. Sophia sat there, her trembling hand touching her cheek, the baby kicking frantically as if reacting to the surge of adrenaline, and she wondered if this time, finally, she could truly fight back. Or if Alexander, with his power and wealth, would keep controlling everything, trapping her in her own life. From the moment that slap reverberated through the air of Pacific View Restaurant in Malibu, Sophia Harper Reynolds felt the world around her shrink, leaving only the searing pain on her cheek and the frantic pounding of her heart blending with the gentle jazz rhythm still echoing from hidden speakers. She bent awkwardly, her 7-month pregnant belly hindering every simple movement, her trembling hand reaching for the metal-framed glasses lying abandoned on the marble floor, glinting under the chandelier's light. The baby inside her kicked frantically, powerful movements like a direct response to the surge of adrenaline, as if the tiny life sensed danger, even from the safety of her womb, a protective instinct Sophia hadn't realized she still possessed. Alexander James Kingsley III, her husband, remained seated with a cold expression, mechanically adjusting his Italian silk tie and raising his red wine glass as if nothing had happened, muttering, "Happy anniversary," with a half-smile eerily reminiscent of when he closed million-dollar deals in Silicon Valley. A touch of dark humor, isn't it? To think he could edit life's reality like tweaking code at his tech company. But in that eerie silence, where the sound of Pacific waves crashing beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed louder than ever, a familiar figure began moving through the dining room with purposeful, steady strides, forged by years of grueling training in Afghanistan. Benjamin Lucas Harper, Ben Sophia's brother, a former Navy SEAL and owner of Pacific View Restaurant, had transformed a rundown seafood shack into a Central California culinary icon through sheer willpower and innate cooking talent. With his dark hair slightly longer than military regulation but still stern, his green eyes flashed with intense focus, the kind of gaze that made the wise step aside and the foolish make the worst decisions of their lives. Ben treated his staff like family, his customers like honored guests, and his sister like the most precious treasure in his world. But tonight, he looked ready for a real battle, not in some distant desert, but right in the heart of his own restaurant. As Ben approached the table, he quickly scanned Sophia's reddened cheek, her trembling hands, her defensive, hunched posture, assessing the evidence with the efficiency of someone trained to evaluate threats and act instantly. Alexander tried to maintain his dominance, wiping his mouth with a napkin and commenting on the exquisite meal, but Ben's gaze never left his sister's face, his voice carrying the controlled calm any veteran would recognize as a red alert warning. Alexander interjected with a sharp, possessive tone. His wife was dealing with pregnancy hormone issues, and he'd appreciate it if Ben returned to the kitchen so they could finish their dinner in peace. But something shifted in Ben's expression, his eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, like the moment before a massive wave crashes ashore, and he responded without raising his voice. Yet each word carried the weight of someone accustomed to managing chaos. The confrontation escalated subtly, with Alexander insulting Ben as a glorified fast food cook, as if wearing a chef's white coat were a joke compared to his high-rise office in Silicon Valley. A bit of bitter humor when you consider that Alexander, with his collection of luxury cars and mansions, seemed envious of a man who chose a simple life after years risking it for his country. Ben didn't flinch, his face as still as granite, and he countered with a calculated, icy rage. This man struck his pregnant sister because he knew she couldn't fight back. Bullying because deep down he was the weakest excuse for a man. Alexander leapt to his feet, his chair toppling with a sound that echoed like breaking bones, and he shoved Ben's chest with both hands, a foolish gesture, like pushing a granite mountain because Ben didn't budge, merely looking down at the hands and then up with a smirk that held no trace of amusement. In that moment, the restaurant's atmosphere crackled with electricity, every diner abandoning the pretense of eating, phones aimed at them recording every second. And Alexander realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had provoked a former SEAL ready to fight, not just with fists but with the full force of training that had saved comrades through countless battlefields. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. From that foolish push, a gesture Alexander James Kingsley III likely thought would assert his CEO authority over a mere chef. The atmosphere at Pacific View Restaurant in Malibu crackled with electricity, as if the Pacific storm beyond the glass windows had surged into the dining room, carrying an unstoppable force. Benjamin Lucas Harper Ben stood firm like a coastal rock, his green eyes flashing with a glint of dark humor as he looked down at the hands still pressing against his chest, as if Alexander had just tried to shove a concrete wall and was stunned it didn't budge. With dozens of smartphones aimed at them, capturing every moment in an era where everything could go viral with a single tap, Alexander tried to regain control by declaring to the entire dining room that his wife was suffering from hormonal imbalances, a flimsy excuse that sounded like he was reading from a Silicon Valley tech firm's crisis CRR script, where every mistake could be fixed with a software update. But Sophia Harper Reynolds, still seated with her cheek burning red and her hands cradling her belly, felt the baby kick harder than ever. The relentless movements, a deep reminder that this tiny life didn't deserve to enter a world where violence was cloaked in trite excuses, igniting a strength within her that 3 years of marriage had tried to extinguish. Ben, honed by 8 years in the Navy SEALs, didn't flinch at Alexander's threats, promises to shut down the restaurant through connections with health inspectors, liquor licensing boards, or even food critics who could ruin reputations overnight. Alexander pulled out his phone, brandishing it like an ultimate weapon, his face flushed with a mix of rage and the smug confidence of a man used to buying off judges and crushing opponents with a well-oiled financial machine. But Ben merely smiled a sly, almost humorous smirk, if not for the tense situation, and countered that Alexander had never fought a real fight, that he'd spent too many years bullying those who couldn't fight back, forgetting what true danger looked like. Those words, delivered as lightly as a chat about the weather, carried the weight of a man who had survived countless special operations, causing nearby diners to instinctively push back from their tables, phones still recording, as the confrontation escalated beyond any social drama they'd ever witnessed. In that moment, Alexander leapt to his feet, his voice ringing with the menace of a man unaccustomed to being challenged, but Ben maintained a balanced stance on the balls of his feet, ready to move as he had in his combat training days. The standoff ended, or rather, exploded, when Alexander confessed on video, his voice echoing to every corner of the silent restaurant. She was his property, and he'd do whatever he wanted with her. Unstoppable by anyone. Those words, captured in high definition by dozens of phones and uploaded to social media before Alexander could realize, stripped away every mask, revealing his true self to the world, a controlling man who saw his wife as an object, his perfect CEO image now shattered beyond repair. Gasps rippled through the room, even from wealthy patrons used to ignoring uncomfortable truths, and some women stood, hands shielding their stomachs or reaching for their companions, as if that slap had awakened a latent fear within them. The police arrived swiftly, sirens wailing in the distance, but at that moment, Sophia suddenly gasped and doubled over, clutching her belly as a sharp pain tore through her midsection. The baby, active all evening, had gone eerily still, a silence so alarming it gripped her heart with fear. They raced to Pacific Coast Hospital in Los Angeles, Ben carrying his sister in his arms with the effortless strength of someone who'd brought wounded comrades to safety while their mother drove with urgent speed. At the hospital, doctor. Sarah Chen, with the calm efficiency honed through hundreds of emergencies, hooked Sophia to a fetal monitor and diagnosed stress-induced complications. Elevated hormones could trigger early contractions, threatening the lives of both mother and child. Sophia lay there, tears streaming down her face, wondering if all those years of enduring were worth this moment. A touch of bitter humor when you consider that Alexander, with all his power, had unwittingly become the greatest threat to his own unborn child. In the stark white light of the emergency room at Pacific Coast Hospital in Los Angeles, time seemed to stand still as Sophia Harper Reynolds doubled over on the hospital bed, clutching her 7-month pregnant belly. Each contraction, a piercing warning that Alexander James Kingsley III's slap had not only wounded her, but also threatened the tiny life fighting to survive within. The sharp, knife-like pain left her gasping, yet deep within her soul, a fire ignited a fierce resolve that this child would not grow up in a world where violence was tolerated. Outside, the distant sound of Pacific waves echoed, a bitter irony against the emotional storm ravaging the room. Ben Harper, her brother, leaned against the wall, his sharp green eyes scanning every move of Dr. Sarah Chen as if assessing a battlefield. But when Victoria Kingsley, Alexander's sister, and the family's shrewd lawyer, strode in with her expensive suit and the smooth tone of someone accustomed to cleaning up scandals, the air grew heavier than ever. A touch of dark humor, in thinking that Victoria probably billed by the hour to fix even her brother's marriage. Victoria, with the confidence of a lawyer who'd made opponents tremble in court, tried to assert control by labeling the incident at Pacific View Restaurant a family misunderstanding, as if a public slap before 50 witnesses was just a minor glitch in Alexander's power software. She pressed Sophia to drop the complaint, her voice as sleek as a meticulously drafted contract, promising private doctors and discreet solutions. But Sophia, despite the pain, felt the baby's faint kicks return, a quiet affirmation that she was no longer Alexander's puppet. She refused, her steady gaze turning to Ben, who stood between her and Victoria like an impregnable fortress, his body language declaring that no legal threat could touch his sister. Alexander appeared soon after, his suit still flawless, but his face betraying a rare hint of panic, pleading with Sophia to resolve it privately in the tone of a man used to buying his way out of trouble. But Sophia, for the first time in 3 years, looked into his eyes and saw nothing but emptiness, a man who had turned love into a prison. Meanwhile, in another corner of Los Angeles, Ben's team, Marcus Reed, Jack Martinez, and Danny O'Connor, former soldiers who'd fought beside him through the most perilous missions, began digging into the Kingsley family's past. What they uncovered was not just a few personal missteps, but an entire system of covered-up scandals spanning decades, from stifled lawsuits to non-disclosure agreements with victims of family members. They found records of large payments to officials, mysteriously vanished reports, and even a hushed-up car accident involving Alexander's uncle. These findings, gathered with military precision, painted a picture of a powerful family, unafraid to manipulate the law to protect their reputation. A bit of bitter humor in considering that Alexander likely saw hitting his wife as another crisis management issue money could solve. But at the hospital, Victoria faced a truth that shook her own beliefs. After leaving the ER, she confronted Alexander at his Beverly Hills mansion, demanding he explain his actions. Instead of remorse, Alexander unleashed a cold fury, threatening to destroy Sophia, Ben, and Pacific View Restaurant if she didn't comply. Shocked by her brother's cruelty, Victoria secretly recorded the conversation, his voice ringing clear as a verdict. Sophia was his property, and he'd do anything to maintain control. That recording, carefully saved on her phone, became the first spark of betrayal not against the Kingsley family, but against Victoria's own moral code. She began to realize that years of defending her brother had made her complicit with a monster. Yet even as Victoria grappled with her conscience, Alexander acted faster. He hired a team of professional private investigators who silently broke into the Santa Monica safe house where Ben planned to shelter Sophia. They took nothing but left deliberate traces, a warning that Alexander could find her anywhere. News of the break-in reached Ben while he was still at the hospital, making him clench his fists, his anger restrained by 8 years of SEAL training but burning like a wildfire. Sophia, lying on the hospital bed with the fetal monitor beeping steadily, felt the familiar fear rise, but this time, it mingled with a newfound resolve. She would not let Alexander steal her child's future. In the dim twilight of the Santa Monica safe house, the Pacific wind hissed through the trees like a whispered warning. But nothing was as chilling as the icy glint in Benjamin Lucas Harper's eyes, as he neutralized 2 intruders sent by Alexander James Kingsley III to deliver a menacing message. With the precision of a former Navy SEAL, Ben bound them with zip ties, not a sound wasted, as if he were executing a mission in Afghanistan rather than protecting his sister on American soil. Sophia Harper Reynolds, inside the house ringed by security cameras, clutched her 7-month pregnant belly, feeling the baby's gentle kicks like a reminder that she was fighting not just for herself, but for a future free of fear. But Alexander, with the arrogance of a Silicon Valley CEO accustomed to manipulating everything, violated the restraining order, appearing near Pacific Coast Hospital to keep up the pressure, only to be swiftly handcuffed by police, a touch of bitter humor and thinking that he, with all his power, forgot the law isn't software he could hack. Detective Vernon Walsh, a former Marine with graying hair and eyes carrying the weary wisdom of 2 decades handling domestic violence, arrived at the safe house with game-changing news. In a makeshift office in Santa Monica, he revealed Alexander's history of violence, 2 sealed juvenile assault charges, buried by the Kingsley family's influence, and 3 911 calls from his first marriage, where his ex-wife refused to cooperate out of fear. These details, like pieces of a dark puzzle, painted a portrait of a systematic abuser, not the poor judgment his family claimed. Sophia, hearing this, felt her heart grow heavy, not from grief, but from realizing she'd believed Alexander's lie, that she was his first serious relationship, the only one to make him lose control. Yet that painful truth also kindled a resilient fire within her, a determination to testify against him, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Victoria Kingsley, Alexander's sister and lawyer, faced a moral crisis at the family's Beverly Hills mansion. She quietly handed Ben a recording from her confrontation with her brother. Alexander's voice chillingly clear through the phone's speaker. He would destroy Sophia, Ben's restaurant, and anyone who dared challenge his authority. The recording, captured with the trembling hand of someone realizing they'd defended the wrong side too long, marked Victoria's complete betrayal of her brother. At a secret meeting in a Santa Barbara community center, under harsh fluorescent lights, she confessed to Ben that she could no longer cover for Alexander, a man she now saw as a danger not just to Sophia but to the Kingsley family's honor. Her hands gripped her briefcase tightly, her eyes revealing pain mixed with resolve, as if she were crossing a point of no return, abandoning her corporate lawyer role to protect what was right. But Alexander, even in custody, refused to stop. From a holding cell, he called Victoria, his voice seething with cold fury, threatening to eliminate the Harper family by any means, from legal maneuvers to shadier methods. Victoria, now standing at a moral crossroads, cut him off with unprecedented steel. She would turn him over to federal authorities if he didn't stop. That declaration, ringing through the phone's speaker, was the final straw. Los Angeles police, working with the FBI, arrested Alexander shortly after on charges of domestic terrorism conspiracy, based on the recording and other evidence from the break-in. The Kingsley family, once untouchable with connections from judges to senators, began to feel the first cracks in their empire, a bit of humor in thinking that Alexander, who prided himself on controlling everything, was now cornered by his own sister. Sophia, at the safe house, felt a wave of hope tinged with anxiety upon hearing of Alexander's arrest. The fetal monitor beside her beeped steadily, signaling the baby's stability, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Ben, standing by the window overlooking the dark forest, clenched his fists, his anger tempered by SEAL discipline, but still blazing for the years his sister endured. Victoria, now an unexpected ally, vowed to support Sophia's testimony, but her eyes betrayed fear that Alexander, even behind bars, could still retaliate. In the gentle August afternoon sunlight at Pacific Coast Hospital in Los Angeles, The clear, piercing cry of Olivia Harper Reynolds rang out like a triumphant symphony, shattering the dark months Sophia Harper Reynolds had fought to overcome. 3 months after the fateful slap at Pacific View Restaurant in Malibu, Sophia lay in the hospital bed, cradling her newborn daughter, weighing 6 pounds 8 ounces, whose deep black eyes gazed at her mother with fierce curiosity, as if already aware she was born from a journey of pain and resilience. Beside her, Dorothy, her mother, with silver hair glinting under the delivery room's light, wiped away tears of joy, whispering that Olivia was perfect after all they'd endured. Benjamin Lucas Harper, Ben, stood by the bed. His usual Navy SEAL demeanor softened as he looked at his niece, his eyes sparkling with pride and awe, as if he'd just completed his toughest mission, protecting his family not with fists but with courage and truth. A touch of light humor flickered as Ben imagined Olivia, with her mother's stubborn chin, soon demanding he teach her to cook Pacific View's famous lobster, a sweet start for a little girl born from a storm. The criminal trial, concluded 6 weeks earlier, marked the downfall of Alexander James Kingsley III. The Los Angeles court sentenced him to 18 months in a minimum security prison, followed by 5 years of probation and mandatory anger management counseling for domestic violence, criminal assault, threats, and violating a restraining order. Videos from the restaurant, Victoria Kingsley's recording, and testimony from 50 witnesses built an airtight case, shattering the perfect Silicon Valley CEO image he'd crafted. The Kingsley family, once untouchable with connections from senators to judges, now faced an SEC investigation into shady financial dealings exposed during the proceedings. A bit of bitter humor in thinking that Alexander, who prided himself on controlling everything, was now betrayed by his own system. A subsequent civil case secured Sophia's financial independence. The Kingsley Family Trust funded Olivia's education and medical expenses, while a generous settlement allowed Sophia to stay home with her daughter for the first 2 years, if she chose. Sophia, now legally reverted to the Harper surname, moved into a modest 3-bedroom craftsman home in Pasadena, a 20-minute drive from Pacific View Restaurant, close enough for Ben's frequent visits, but far enough to build a life free of Alexander's shadow. The house, purchased with settlement funds, symbolized the freedom she once thought unattainable. The nursery, decorated by Dorothy and restaurant friends in soft greens and pale yellows, featured a mural of ocean waves evoking Pacific View's vista, a reminder that even the fiercest waves eventually fade. Sophia sat in a rocking chair, holding Olivia, feeling peace for the first time in 3 years of a controlling marriage, where every day was a battle to hold on to herself. She taught her daughter the value of protection over control, love over fear, and the courage to stand against injustice. Ben, now back to being a chef and doting uncle, brought a basket of food from the restaurant, joking that Olivia needed to love knowledge before trying his lobster. He stood by a wall-mounted bookshelf, already filled with children's books, and said knowledge was power, a lesson he wanted his niece to embrace early. Victoria, in an unexpected gesture, sent a bouquet of white roses and a card, wishing you and Olivia the peaceful life you both deserve. She had become an unlikely ally, her testimony and recording pivotal in convicting Alexander, though it cost her some corporate clients. The story closed with a heart-stirring message. Justice and family will always triumph over violence, a message resonating with American audiences, where individualism and protecting loved ones are core values. But as Sophia prepared to leave the hospital, a text from Detective Vernon Walsh gave her pause. Alexander had filed an appeal that morning, though legal experts said his chances of success were nearly zero. Ben, standing by the window overlooking Pasadena's sunlight, clenched his fists, knowing their peace remained fragile. Sophia looked down at Olivia, resolute that her daughter would grow up in a world free of Alexander's shadow. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.